I was still wearing the dress I picked out for Jordan's graduation. Navy with tiny white flowers, his school colors. I had imagined it so clearly, the click of my heels across the college quad, the warm press of my son's shoulder against mine in photos, the tight hug he'd give me when he spotted me in the crowd. That moment, the one I'd waited years for. And instead, I got this. "We just think it's easier this way," Derek said, voice flat like he was discussing lawn maintenance or bills. He didn't even look up from his mug of coffee. I blinked. "What is?" He glanced toward the doorway, and that's when Jordan appeared. My son. Taller than I remembered. When had he grown into that jawline, but suddenly so small in the way he wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's just, graduation's gonna be a lot," he muttered, scratching the back of his neck. I waited for the punchline. Some awkward joke. A laugh, even a nervous one. But it never came. "You're not inviting me?" I asked slowly, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. I leaned on the kitchen island, my hands gripping the cool marble like it might hold me up. Derek exhaled like I was being difficult, like my confusion was exhausting. "There's tension, Maya. Lindsay will be there. Ray's family. It's just too complicated. We don't want drama." Drama. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Because if I started, I wouldn't stop. If I let the words out, they would come sharp and ragged and furious. How many dinners had I made while Lindsay sat across from me, barely civil? How many times had I bitten my tongue so Ray wouldn't think less of our family? How many sacrifices had I made to keep everything stitched together, and now I was the problem? Easier for who? I asked, barely above a whisper. Jordan still wouldn't look at me. "I didn't want to fight, Mom. I just thought you should know now." Now, 3 days before the ceremony. They waited until I had booked the hotel, printed the itinerary, ordered his graduation gift. I stepped back. My chest felt like it was folding in on itself. "Right," I said, nodding. "Of course. Easier." Derek stood, rinsed out his mug, completely unfazed. "Let's not make this a thing." And that was it. No apology. No explanation. Just the closing of a cabinet and the distant sound of a car door as Jordan left for a meeting with his friends. I sat there long after they were gone. The clock ticked loud in the quiet. I stared at the framed photos on the wall, Jordan at 6 with a missing tooth, Derek holding him on his shoulders at Disneyland, me behind the camera, always behind the camera. I had built this life. I had poured my soul into it, and now they had carved me out of it like I was an afterthought. I didn't cry. That surprised me. My body felt too hollow to cry. Instead, I stood, walked to the closet, and pulled out my suitcase. My hands moved on their own, grabbing a stack of jeans, a few sundresses, my hiking boots. No one was home to notice. In the hallway, I paused by Jordan's door. The one I used to knock on before bedtime. The one I had painted blue with him when he was 10. I didn't go in. I just looked at the closed door and wondered when exactly I'd stopped being invited in. I returned to my room, logged onto my laptop, and typed in one-way flights. I don't know why Portugal came to mind. Maybe it was the sound of the word. Lisboa. It felt soft, unfamiliar. A place with cliffs and ocean and no memories pressing in on me from every corner. I chose a ticket. Booked it. 7:25 a.m. Nonstop. There was no ceremony to attend. No toast to give. No hotel to check into. I had nowhere to be. And suddenly, I realized I could just leave. I didn't write a note. I didn't call my sister or text my book club or let the neighbors know. I didn't leave a key or instructions or a forwarding address. I just zipped the suitcase shut and left it by the door. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Derek came home late. I heard the floor creak outside our bedroom, his keys drop into the bowl near the entryway. But he didn't come in. Maybe he thought I was asleep. Maybe he didn't care. I watched the moonlight shift across the wall and tried to feel something: grief, anger, devastation. But all I felt was numb. At 5:30 a.m., I got up, showered, dressed, and rolled my suitcase out of the house without a sound. No note. No goodbye. Just silence. And somehow that silence said everything. The suitcase wheels hummed softly against the hardwood as I rolled it through the hallway, careful not to hit the edges. The house was still, eerily so. No creaks, no footsteps above, no low hum of the TV Derek liked to fall asleep to. Just silence, deep and total, like the house itself knew I was leaving. I glanced once toward our bedroom, the door cracked just enough for a sliver of darkness to show. I didn't pause. I stepped out into the cool morning air, the weight of the suitcase oddly comforting in my grip. The Uber pulled into the driveway with headlights low and quiet, as if it too understood the mood. I loaded the bag myself, nodding to the driver in silence. As the car pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. No one would wake for at least another hour. Derek liked to sleep late on Saturdays, and Jordan, well, if he came home at all, it would have been past midnight. There would be no confrontation. No explanations. I gave them none of the drama they feared. I gave them nothing. At the airport, I moved through security like a ghost. My passport, barely used, felt stiff in my hand. I watched the people around me, families, couples, business travelers with crisp suits and tired eyes. Everyone had somewhere to be, someone expecting them. I was just floating. A woman in transition. A woman they had uninvited from her own son's milestone. I had chosen Lisboa almost on instinct. There was a calmness to the name, a melody. Portugal had never been on my list before, but something about it now seemed right. Far enough. Different enough. Quiet. As I sat at the gate, I ordered a coffee and wrapped my hands around the warm cup like it might anchor me. My phone buzzed once, an alert from the airline. Not Derek. Not Jordan. Not anyone who mattered. I turned it face down and let it be. I thought about all the years I'd given to them. The carpools. The late-night fevers. The science fair displays. The packed lunches and endless cheering at soccer games. I had been the background music of their lives, constant, reliable, expected. They hadn't noticed me fading. Maybe they thought I wouldn't. Maybe they thought I couldn't. When they told me not to come to Jordan's graduation, they weren't just excluding me from an event. They were rewriting me out of the story. And the worst part? They did it calmly. Like it made sense. Like it was logical. Easier, they said. But as I sat there, waiting to board a plane halfway across the world, a strange kind of steadiness washed over me. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't begged. I had simply walked away. And in that quiet exit, I realized something powerful. They couldn't define me anymore. The flight boarded. I took my seat by the window and fastened my seatbelt as the engines began their slow rumble to life. The plane ascended into the sky, leaving behind the city I had lived in for over 2 decades, the house I had made a home, the people I had poured myself into. As we broke through the clouds, I closed my eyes and let the hum of altitude carry me away. When we landed, the light was different, softer, almost golden. Lisboa felt like a place between dreams and waking life. The cobblestone streets glimmered faintly with moisture from the morning mist. I moved slowly, like someone relearning how to be in her own skin. A driver stood near the terminal exit holding a sign with my name. I smiled, surprised by how good it felt to see it. Maya Thornton. A name untethered. The villa I'd booked sat high above the cliffs, whitewashed with terracotta tiles and wide windows that framed the Atlantic like a painting. I walked through the threshold, set my bag down in the entryway, and simply stood there. Breathing. The air smelled of salt and jasmine. The kind of smell that clears your lungs and your head. I walked out to the terrace and stared at the endless blue, the cliffs carved by centuries of wind and time. It was still early morning in Portugal, but already the world here felt warmer. Slower. No one expected anything from me here. I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up with missed calls, unread messages. Derek. Jordan. Even Lindsay. I didn't open a single one. Instead, I opened the camera, turned it to face the view behind me, and snapped a single photo, my silhouette against the Atlantic, the sky wide and open and mine. I posted it with just one caption, "Silence looks good on me." Then I powered off the phone and set it face down on the table beside me. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't waiting for someone to ask where I was. I wasn't scrambling to fix something. I wasn't invisible or ignored or asked to make myself small for the sake of family peace. I was here, alone, unclaimed, and it felt like peace. The air tasted different. Salty, yes, but layered, like the sea breeze carried history and poetry and every unspoken thing I'd stuffed down for the last 2 decades. As I stepped out of the car, the narrow street curved gently upward, flanked by homes in soft yellows and dusty pinks with balconies spilling green vines. Everything looked sun-kissed and slow, like even time had decided to stretch and breathe. The villa was perched on a hill above the coast, quiet and white with deep blue shutters that reminded me of old postcards. It wasn't extravagant, just simple and open, the kind of place built for peace. The host, a gentle woman named Helena with kind eyes and silver hair pulled into a knot, handed me the key with no fuss. She only said, "You'll like the quiet here," and I already knew I would. Inside, the villa smelled faintly of lavender and stone. The walls were cool to the touch, thick and textured, holding in the shade like a sanctuary. I walked through the room slowly, barefoot, dragging my fingers along the smooth banisters and wooden door frames. The bedroom opened onto a balcony with a wrought iron railing and a view that made my breath catch, cliffs that dropped into crashing waves, a horizon stretching endless and soft. I didn't unpack. I wasn't ready for permanence. I just slipped off my shoes, poured myself a glass of water from the clay pitcher on the counter, and stepped out onto the balcony. Below, the ocean was a living, breathing thing, deep and wild and free. I let the breeze pull through my hair, closed my eyes, and tilted my face to the sun. I didn't cry. I expected I might. But there was something about this place that told me there was no need for tears right now. There would be time for that later. Or maybe not at all. After a while, I took out my phone, not to check messages, not to scroll, but to mark the moment. I took a photo. The ocean, the cliffs, and just the edge of my bare foot resting on sun-warmed tile. I added one caption, "Silence looks good on me." And I meant it. I posted it, turned off the phone, and set it aside. I didn't need the weight of their words right now. Derek's rationalizing, Jordan's guilt, the endless cycle of emotional cleanup I'd always volunteered for. I was off duty. I wandered down to the small kitchen and opened the window. The sounds of gulls, distant voices in Portuguese, and wind-blown leaves became the soundtrack of my solitude. I made tea. Real tea, not a rushed Keurig cup between tasks. I watched the water boil, poured it slowly, sat at the little stone table, and sipped in silence. No phone in hand. No to-do list. Just tea. By mid-afternoon, I had walked down to the nearby beach, less touristy, more windswept. The sand was warm and coarse, the tide unpredictable. I sat on a smooth rock for over an hour, letting the sea spray my face, the wind tangle my hair. My thoughts moved slowly, like waves. I thought of Jordan's first day of school. How he clung to my hand, terrified to let go. How Derek had snapped a photo and smiled like he was part of it when really, it had always been me holding things together. Me making the sandwiches. Me memorizing the teacher's name. Me waiting in the carpool line. And now I was the one they left behind like an old sweater that didn't fit anymore. But not here. Here, I wasn't somebody's wife. Somebody's mother. Somebody's scapegoat. I was just Maya. And I was starting to wonder who that even was, beneath all the roles. I made dinner that night. A simple salad with goat cheese, fresh figs, and crusty bread I picked up at the corner bakery. I opened a bottle of Vinho Verde and let it breathe while I watched the sun set in layers of gold and orange. I didn't set the table for two. I didn't wait for anyone to join me. I ate slowly, savoring every bite like it was an act of rebellion. By the time I slipped into bed, the windows wide open to the night air, I felt it, something unfamiliar but welcome. Space. Space to think. Space to be. No one asking anything of me. No one expecting a response or a sacrifice or an apology. I lay back on the linen sheets, the fan whirring gently overhead, and stared at the dark ceiling. And for the first time in what felt like years, I realized I wasn't afraid of what came next. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a timeline or a list or even an idea of what healing was supposed to look like. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had finally left the room where I was no longer welcome. And I had found one where I could actually hear myself think. And in the quiet, my own voice, tired but still here, began to whisper back. The phone began buzzing before the sun even lifted over the cliffs. A low hum on the wooden nightstand, rhythmic and persistent, as if it could will me back into the life I had slipped away from. I didn't open my eyes at first. I lay there in the linen sheets, listening to the waves roll against the shore outside the open windows. The breeze moved gently across my bare shoulder, and I pulled the blanket tighter around me. But the phone didn't stop. Buzz. Pause. Buzz again. One after another. I reached for it without thinking and squinted at the screen. 10 missed calls. Derek. Jordan. Lindsay. More messages than I cared to count. The last notification was from Ethan, my brother. Just one text. You dodged a bullet. Drama exploded. I stared at those words for a long moment, then dropped the phone onto the bed beside me. No part of me wanted to know more. Not yet. Instead, I got up, padded barefoot into the kitchen, and started the kettle. The air smelled of morning and the faint sweetness of bread from a nearby bakery. The quiet here was different, soft, full, alive. Not like the silence at home, which always felt weighted, like holding your breath in a room where no one sees you. The phone buzzed again. I ignored it and sliced a fig. It buzzed 2 more times while I brewed tea. I carried the cup to the terrace and sat on the cool stone ledge, watching as the sky shifted from gray to pale gold. Below, the ocean shimmered, a body with moods and movement and no need to explain itself. I envied it. I wanted to be like that, whole and unapologetic. By the time I returned inside, my phone had 17 missed calls. 17. I set it in the kitchen drawer and closed it. Not out of anger. Not out of pettiness. I just didn't owe them my morning. It was strange, this power I felt in the quiet. I wasn't used to holding boundaries this cleanly. I used to rush toward conflict, like it was my responsibility to smooth everything over. To be the emotional glue. The explainer. The fixer. But not now. Now I was just Maya, in a villa by the sea, drinking tea in her bare feet and letting the world call without answering. Later, when I pulled the phone out, it was out of curiosity more than anything else. I scrolled through the messages slowly, detached, like reading a script for a play I no longer starred in. Derek, Maya, call me back. Please. Jordan, Mom. Seriously. What are you doing? Call me. We need to talk. Lindsay, this is not how families handle things. You're being dramatic. I let out a laugh, short and bitter. I wasn't the dramatic one. I was the one who had been erased from a milestone event like I was a messy detail in a perfect photo. I scrolled again. Derek, I didn't mean to hurt you. This is just complicated. Let's talk. Jordan, please. Can you just let me explain? It wasn't like that. Lindsay, do you think disappearing was mature? Grow up, Maya. Then, Ethan's second text. You're not gonna believe this. Ray called him out in front of everyone. Screenshots. Full expose. Total disaster. I paused. I read that one again. And again. Then I burst out laughing. It wasn't joyful. It wasn't cruel. It was a laugh that came from disbelief and exhaustion. The kind of laugh that bubbled up from a place inside you that's been bruised too long. Of course it fell apart. Of course someone had to pick up the mess. And for once, it hadn't been me. I poured another cup of tea and sat at the table, reading Ethan's follow-up. Everyone kept looking around for you like you were supposed to jump in and fix it. Guess what? They had to deal with it themselves. That was the moment I felt it, a deep breath, low and full, pushing out air I didn't know I'd been holding for years. I was done cleaning up. I was done contorting myself into shapes that made other people comfortable. For so long, I had believed that my presence was the bomb. That without me, things would fall apart. And maybe they would. But that wasn't my emergency to solve anymore. I finished my tea and rinsed the cup. The phone buzzed once more, another text from Derek. Just talk to me. It doesn't have to be this way. I looked at the screen for a moment before locking it and sliding it across the table. It already was this way. I slipped on sandals, grabbed a scarf, and headed out the door. I walked down toward the cliffs, where the sun was now high and warm on my skin. The path was rocky and quiet, just the sound of the wind and distant crashing waves. Each step felt like reclamation. Like a soft but steady return to myself. They could flood my phone. They could unravel and panic and plead. But I wasn't there anymore. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. I was sitting in a small cafe tucked beneath a canopy of bougainvillea, the kind of place you stumble upon by accident and never want to leave. The espresso in front of me was rich and dark, served in a tiny ceramic cup with a saucer painted like the tiles that line the sidewalks here in Lisboa. I had taken to spending my mornings like this, no phone, no schedule, just the murmur of voices in a language I didn't speak and the gentle rhythm of life not demanding anything of me. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't realized I craved until I got here. The phone vibrated against the table. For a second, I considered ignoring it again, as I had for the past 2 days. But something tugged at me, curiosity or intuition, I wasn't sure. I flipped it over. Ethan. I hesitated, then picked up. Maya, he said without preamble, his voice low, like he was half laughing and half stunned. You seriously picked the perfect time to vanish. I blinked. Why? There was a pause, like he was savoring the delivery. Because everything back home just exploded. And I mean, thermonuclear levels. My stomach twisted, not with fear exactly, but with that conditioned reflex I still hadn't unlearned, the instinct to prepare for damage control. What happened? He exhaled, and I could practically hear him shaking his head. Jordan's girlfriend, Ray? She stood up in the middle of their graduation brunch. Right after the server poured mimosas. In front of everyone, Lindsay, Derek, her parents, his friends, everyone. She pulled out her phone, Maya. Started scrolling through messages. Screenshots. Proof. She exposed the whole damn thing. I sat back in my chair, the sound of birds chirping around me suddenly distant. Exposed what? He cheated on her. Repeatedly. With some girl from his lab group, apparently. Ray had receipts. DMs, texts, everything. She laid it all out like a damn TED Talk. And you should have seen their faces. Derek looked like someone pulled the floor out from under him. Lindsay kept hissing at Ray to stop, but Ray just got louder. I closed my eyes. The scene unfolded in my mind without effort. Ray, composed and fiery. Jordan, stunned and scrambling. Derek, embarrassed more by the mess than the truth of it. And Lindsay, probably furious that anyone would dare air out the family dysfunction in front of strangers. Ethan kept going. People were frozen. Like, literally holding forks midair. And then Ray finished with, I hope this degree helps you grow up, because being a man clearly isn't on your resume yet. Then she walked out. Despite myself, I let out a short laugh. Wow! Oh, and get this, Ethan added. After she left, everyone kept looking around like someone was supposed to fix it. Like you were supposed to pop up with tissues and a carefully worded apology to smooth it over. That stopped me. He was right. For years, I had been that person. The buffer. The calm in the storm. The one who gently explained someone's bad behavior away, who stepped in with grace when Derek fumbled or Jordan acted out. I had stitched every fraying edge, even when it cost me pieces of myself. It had always been me. But this time, I wasn't there. I wasn't the glue. I wasn't the shield. I guess they had to sit in it, I murmured. Damn right they did, Ethan said. It was glorious. Uncomfortable as hell. But glorious. I smiled. Not because I wanted Jordan to be humiliated. Not because I relished Ray's pain. But because for once, I wasn't the one bleeding to keep everything intact. I wasn't cleaning up anyone's mess. I was here, sipping espresso in the sun, letting the tide of their consequences crash exactly where it needed to. Ethan grew quiet for a beat. You okay, though? I mean, really? I looked out at the street, where an old woman was sweeping flower petals off her doorstep with deliberate care. I think I am. Actually, I think I'm better than okay. He chuckled. Never thought I'd say this, but I think your silent exit might have been the most powerful thing you've ever done. I didn't plan it, I admitted. I just couldn't stay where I wasn't seen anymore. You shouldn't have to, he said simply. After we hung up, I sat with everything Ethan had told me. I wasn't surprised by Jordan's mistakes. He was young and impulsive and had never really been held accountable. Derek had always covered for him. Lindsay had always meddled and excused. And I had been the one expected to make it all palatable. But not anymore. I walked back toward the villa slowly, letting the warmth sink into my skin. My phone buzzed again, Jordan this time. I didn't open it. I wasn't ready. He would need to learn what silence felt like, too. Not out of punishment, but out of necessity. Because sometimes silence isn't absence. It's clarity. And mine was just beginning. I hadn't planned on speaking to anyone that day. My mind was still tangled in the aftermath Ethan had shared, and even the sea breeze felt heavier as I walked down the stone path toward the beach. The sun was warm on my back, and I kept my pace slow, careful, like I was trying not to startle the silence that had finally become a part of me. The beach near the cliffs wasn't crowded, just a few scattered locals and one older couple walking hand in hand along the waterline. It was the kind of place you go to be alone, and I had taken comfort in that routine, bare feet in the sand, ocean stretching endlessly forward, no one asking me to explain anything. That's when I saw her. She was sitting on a large flat rock near the dunes, legs crossed beneath a long linen skirt, a sketch pad resting against her knees. Her hair was a wild halo of curls, dark, sun-kissed, and unbothered by the wind. She wore round sunglasses and no shoes, a half-empty bottle of red wine sitting beside a bowl of green olives. She looked completely at ease, like she belonged to the earth itself. I didn't mean to stare, but she looked up and caught my eye. Instead of turning away or offering a polite nod, she smiled like she'd been waiting for me. "You're new," she said. Her accent was hard to place, something laced with both warmth and softness. Portuguese, maybe? French? "I am," I said, brushing sand from my calf. "Just arrived a few days ago." She patted the rock beside her. "Sit. You have the face of someone carrying too many thoughts. Let the sea hold them for a while." I hesitated, then walked over and accepted her invitation. The rock was warm, the breeze gentle. We sat side by side without speaking at first. She continued sketching, slow strokes of charcoal on thick paper, while I watched the tide play with the edges of the shore. "I'm Camila," she said eventually. "Maya." She nodded like she already knew. "American?" I gave a soft laugh. "Is it that obvious?" "It's the sadness," she said, not unkindly. "And the way you keep looking at the ocean like it owes you answers." I blinked, caught off guard. "You're not wrong." Camila reached for the wine and poured a splash into a chipped ceramic cup. She handed it to me, then took a few olives from the bowl and popped one into her mouth like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Tell me one thing," she said, looking out over the water. "Why are you really here?" The wine was smooth, richer than anything I'd had back home. I let it roll across my tongue before answering. "I wasn't invited to my son's graduation." Camila turned to me, curious but not invasive. I kept talking. "My husband told me it was easier that way. That my presence would make things complicated. And instead of arguing or begging, I packed a bag and left." She let that sit between us, not rushing to respond. Then she said, "Good." I blinked. "Good." "Yes. You refused to stay where you were not wanted. That is not a weakness, Maya. That is freedom." I stared at her, unsure whether to cry or laugh. No one had said anything like that to me. Not even Ethan. Not even myself. Camila tilted her sketch pad toward me. On it was the start of a charcoal drawing, fluid lines, the outline of a woman facing the ocean, hair tangled in wind. She hadn't drawn my face, but it was unmistakably me. "You see people," I whispered. "I try," she said simply. "It's easier when they stop pretending." We stayed on that rock for hours. Talking, drinking. She told me she was half Brazilian, half French, raised in Marseille, but always chasing the sun. She'd lived in Lisboa for 4 years, painting, sketching, selling art to tourists and locals alike. But mostly, she said, I live for the stories. Everyone has one. Most people just need someone to see them before they can tell it. And somehow, without meaning to, I told her mine. I talked about Derek, about Jordan, about the years of bending and folding and staying quiet to keep things from falling apart. I told her about the graduation that never included me, about Ray's public call-out, about the messages I still hadn't replied to. I let the words tumble out, unfiltered, as the sun dipped lower into the water. Camila never interrupted. She didn't try to fix anything. She just listened, refilled our cups, and nodded like every truth I shared mattered. When I finally paused, I looked out at the ocean. The horizon was glowing, and I realized the ache in my chest had lightened, just a little. You don't need to go back, she said gently. I don't. You can start again. Right here. Just as you are. I wanted to believe her. Sitting there, on a rock beside a woman I'd met only hours before, I almost did. And for the first time since I left, I felt seen, not as a wife, not as a mother, not as a problem to be managed, but as a person. A woman rewriting her story, one honest moment at a time. The guilt didn't arrive like a wave crashing in, it came quietly, like fog rolling through the cliffs at dawn. At first, I didn't even recognize it for what it was. I thought I was just tired. But as I stood on the terrace with a warm cup of tea in my hands, watching the sky turn a bruised shade of lavender, I felt it settle deep in my bones. I hadn't checked my phone in almost a full day. I told myself it was an act of peace. Camila's words still echoed in my head, you don't need to go back, and I had believed them. Sitting beside her with wine and wind and nothing between us but truth, I had felt powerful, almost free. But freedom has a way of stirring things up too. Guilt can sneak in when you least expect it. When I finally turned on my phone, I didn't even brace myself. I just watched the screen light up like a flare. Notifications stacked one over the other, unread texts, missed calls, voicemails. My thumb hovered over the messages, then slowly, I tapped into the thread from Derek first. Okay, you've made your point. Come back. Just like that. No softness, no apology. Just a command wearing the clothes of a concession. I stared at the words for a long time, something twisting in my stomach. It wasn't surprise, I knew Derek. I knew that tone. It was always less about connection, more about control. Even now, he couldn't simply say he was sorry. He needed to reframe the story to make me the one performing an act, a stunt. Like my disappearance was just theater. Like my pain had a deadline. Then Jordan's name lit up the screen. A voicemail. I hesitated, then pressed play. Hey, Mom. I screwed up. His voice was quieter than usual. Hesitant. I miss you. I didn't think. I didn't realize what it would feel like not having you there. Ray, he paused, his voice thickening. She called me out, and she was right. I was an idiot. And now everything's just wrecked. I don't know what to do. The message ended with silence. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone resting in my hand, heartbeat pulsing in my throat. And there it was, the guilt. Thick, undeniable, familiar. It wrapped around me like a weighted blanket soaked in memory. I remembered the way he used to fall asleep in my arms, warm and small. The time he got sick on a school trip and I drove 5 hours in the middle of the night just to bring him home. The college applications we stayed up filling out. The lunchbox notes he used to save in a shoebox under his bed. He was my son. And he missed me. I didn't know how to hold that truth next to the other ones, the ones where he stood by while Derek dismissed me, where he stayed silent as I was told not to come, where he let comfort win over courage. The duality of motherhood was like that. I loved him, even when I was angry. I ached for him, even as I wanted to scream. But I didn't call back. Not yet. Instead, I walked outside, the air cooler now, the wind more insistent. The cliffs below were wrapped in sea mist, and the sound of the waves echoed louder against the stone. I stood there for a while, one hand resting on the railing, my phone in the other. It would be easy to forgive him, to fly home, to slip right back into the role. Derek was already expecting it. Lindsay likely assumed I would. Even Jordan, with all his regret, was waiting for the moment I said, "It's okay, sweetheart," and picked up the broken pieces. But something inside me resisted. Not out of bitterness. Out of clarity. Because I finally understood that love didn't mean losing myself. That being a mother didn't mean being invisible. That forgiveness, if it was to mean anything at all, couldn't be automatic. It had to be chosen. And I wasn't there yet. I sat on the terrace, watching the last sliver of sun dip beneath the ocean, and let the guilt wash over me without drowning in it. I missed Jordan. I ached for the boy he used to be. But I wasn't willing to trade this version of myself, the one who had found stillness, the one who had been seen, for the version who always made herself small to keep the peace. I held the phone in my hand until the screen dimmed, and then I set it face down on the table beside me. I would respond eventually. Maybe even soon. But not tonight. Tonight, I wasn't the fixer. I wasn't the fallback. Tonight, I was just Maya. And for now, that was enough. The morning sky over Lisboa was silver and soft, the kind that makes the world feel hushed and suspended, as if it's waiting for you to decide who you want to be. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, cradling a warm mug of coffee, watching the light shift across the terracotta tiles. The air smelled like salt and citrus. My phone sat on the table, screen dark, Derek and Jordan's messages untouched. They hadn't said anything new, not really. Just echoes of the same old rhythm. Come back, let's move on, you've made your point. But today felt different. Today, I wasn't letting the guilt guide me. Today, I was choosing intention. I took my coffee to the terrace, wrapped in a soft shawl, and listened to the waves crashing below. The wind was cool against my skin. In the quiet, I opened the voice recorder app on my phone. No script, no rehearsing. I just tapped the red circle and spoke. "Jordan," I said, my voice steady. "I heard your message." I paused, letting the silence breathe. "I want you to know I miss you too. But I'm not coming back just to clean up your mess. Not this time." I didn't rush the words. I let them come naturally, as if you were sitting beside me. "You made a choice, just like I did. And I'm not punishing you for that. I'm setting a boundary. One I probably should have set a long time ago. If you're ready to have a real conversation about what's happened, about what needs to change, not just for you, but between us, I'll be here. But I'm not going to pretend everything's okay just because things got hard. That's not love, Jordan. That's enabling." I looked out at the horizon, let the words sit in the air a moment longer. I love you. But I love myself too. And I'm learning how to take care of both. I hit stop. No edits. No playback. I sent the recording in a message and then, without hesitation, turned off the phone. Completely off. Not just silenced. I slipped it into the kitchen drawer and closed it. Then I grabbed my hiking boots and filled my water bottle. There was a trail Camila had told me about, tucked beyond the western cliffs. "It's steep," she warned with a smile, "but it gives you a view most people never earn." I wanted that. I wanted to feel my body work, my heart pound, my breath stretch to meet the climb. I wanted the kind of effort that reminded me I was alive and capable on my own. The path started narrow and uneven, rocks jutting out between tufts of grass. The air smelled of rosemary and sun-warmed earth. I moved slowly at first, steadying myself, adjusting to the incline. But as I kept climbing, my steps grew more confident. With every turn in the trail, I felt lighter, like the weight I'd carried for years was peeling off layer by layer. Halfway up, I paused and looked back. The village was just a smattering of rooftops now, the sea a long sheet of silver and blue. I had come so far, and not just in miles. At the summit, the cliffs opened into a narrow ridge that jutted over the water. There was no safety rail, no sign warning me back. Just raw earth and sky. I stepped out slowly, letting the wind whip through my hair. My chest rose and fell with effort and awe. I sat down on the edge and pulled my knees to my chest. For years, I had made myself smaller to keep the family stable. I had taken on their moods, their stress, their guilt. I had been the cushion, the sponge, the fixer. It had been so automatic I hadn't even seen it happening. And when they told me not to come to Jordan's graduation, it wasn't just a betrayal, it was a moment of clarity. They didn't see me. They saw what I did for them. And now, sitting on this ridge above the sea, I realized something important. I had finally stopped performing. There was no audience here. No one to applaud or criticize. Just me. I reached into my bag and pulled out the notebook I'd bought at a street market a few days ago. Its cover was stitched leather, soft and worn like a secret. I opened to the first blank page and wrote, "Today, I chose myself." Not out of anger. Not out of spite. But because I am worthy of choosing. I underlined it. Then I drew a small, messy heart beside the words, "Not perfect, but mine." When I finally climbed back down, the sun was high and bright, casting golden light across the trail. My muscles ached, my clothes were damp with sweat, but I felt good. Strong. Clear. Back at the villa, I showered, dressed in linen, and lit a candle in the kitchen just because it smelled like orange blossoms and made me feel calm. I poured a glass of cool water and stood by the open window, letting the breeze wash over me. I didn't know if Jordan had listened to my message. I didn't know if Derek would try again. But I did know this: I had stepped out of the old patterns. And once you claim your power, you don't give it back. You keep climbing. The wheels of my suitcase echoed hollowly on the wooden floor as I stepped back into the house that used to feel like mine. The key had still worked. Derek hadn't thought to change the locks. Or maybe he had and then changed his mind. Either way, the door had opened without resistance, and now I stood in the front hallway, staring at a space that somehow felt both familiar and foreign. The air was still. No voices. No footsteps overhead. The silence wrapped around me, but it wasn't the cold silence of being ignored or shut out. This was something else. Something clean. I walked through slowly, letting my fingers graze the surfaces I once wiped every Sunday, the walls that held framed memories. A few photos were missing, probably packed up with Derek's things. The living room looked untouched otherwise, but I could feel the difference. It was in the absence. In the way the air carried no scent of aftershave, no stray socks or coffee mugs left around like breadcrumbs of his presence. I stepped into the kitchen. It was spotless. Too spotless. As if someone had tried to erase the life we lived here. I pulled open the fridge, nearly empty. A bottle of water, some condiments, an old takeout container I didn't trust. I closed it gently, then reached for my suitcase and rolled it down the hallway to the bedroom. The bed had been stripped of its usual duvet. His side of the closet was empty. Only mine remained. Dresses I hadn't worn in months, shoes I had long since stopped choosing. I ran my hand along the hangers. Funny how something could look the same and feel entirely different. I sat on the edge of the bed and took a long breath. The mattress gave beneath me, just as it always had, but it didn't hold the weight of shared history anymore. It was just a bed now. And I was just a woman, returned, not for them, but for herself. I unpacked slowly. A few dresses from Lisboa, my sketchbook, a pair of sandals that still held flecks of beach sand in the soles. I placed them in drawers, not because I planned to stay forever, but because this part of my story deserved to be lived with intention. I wasn't moving backward. I was choosing how I moved forward. When I finished, I went to the kitchen and made a grocery list: eggs, fresh bread, olive oil, tomatoes, a bottle of wine. Simple things. Nourishing things. I grabbed my keys, left the house without hesitation, and walked to the nearby market. The cashier, a girl who used to see me every week, blinked in surprise when she saw me. "You're back," she said, as if it were a question. I smiled. For now. Back at home, I opened the windows wide and let the breeze drift in. I lit a candle on the table, lavender and cedarwood, one I had bought months ago but never used, and began to cook. The sizzle of oil in the pan, the scent of garlic, the sound of a wooden spoon scraping against a skillet, they were grounding. Ordinary. And completely mine. I set the table for one. Not out of loneliness, but choice. I plated the food carefully, poured a glass of wine, and sat down in the quiet kitchen where I had once been a background figure. This time, I was centered. As I ate, I looked around, noticing things I hadn't before. The scratches on the kitchen island from when Jordan did homework with a pencil too sharp. The paint chip on the corner of the wall where Derek once dropped a ladder during a rushed DIY project. The tiny crack in the window pane that I'd always meant to fix. But none of it stirred grief. Only acknowledgement. After dinner, I washed the dishes by hand. I moved slowly, deliberately, as if restoring rhythm to a space that had been paused. Then I dried my hands, lit another candle in the living room, and curled up on the couch with a blanket I hadn't used in years. The silence stretched out around me, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. I glanced at my phone, still off, resting on the table beside me. I didn't turn it on. I didn't need to. Whatever messages waited there could wait longer. Later, as night settled in, I walked through the house and turned off the lights one by one. I paused outside Jordan's room, just as I had the night I left. The door was closed. I opened it slowly, stepping into the dark. His things were still there, mostly untouched. Posters, books, the baseball glove I once helped him find in a panic before his first middle school game. I walked to the bed and smoothed the cover. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just stood still, allowing the space to exist as it was. No more pretending. Then I turned off the light and closed the door behind me. In my room, I changed into linen pajamas and slipped into bed. The sheets were cool. The breeze drifted through the open window, rustling the curtains. I turned off the bedside lamp and stared at the ceiling in the dark. I had come home, but it wasn't the same home I had left, because I wasn't the same woman. And that was exactly how it should be. The morning light filtered in gently through the window, casting soft shadows across the floorboards. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up with a knot in my chest. No mental checklist. No emotional bracing. Just sunlight, birdsong, and the steady inhale-exhale of a day waiting to begin on my own terms. I got out of bed slowly, savoring the sensation of cool wood beneath my feet. I pulled my robe around my shoulders, walked to the kitchen, and brewed a pot of coffee. The house was quiet, but not in the eerie, disconnected way it used to be. Now, it was quiet like a library before the first reader arrives, pregnant with possibility. I took my mug outside to the porch. The air smelled of early spring, earthy, crisp, just a hint of blossoms on the breeze. Across the yard, the garden beds I had once abandoned were wild with weeds and stubborn flowers that had grown without permission. I smiled at them. They had survived. So had I. By noon, I found myself in the garage, dusting off cans of paint I'd shoved into the corner years ago. It felt impulsive, but maybe healing always starts that way, one small, unexpected urge. I tugged on old jeans and a shirt I didn't mind ruining and started with the guest room. The walls had been a dull beige for over a decade, chosen more for neutrality than joy. I opened a can of soft blue and dipped the brush in without thinking. Each stroke felt like a reclaiming. Paint smeared across my wrist, my forearm, a splotch even found its way into my hair, but I didn't care. I sang along to an old playlist I used to listen to when Jordan was little. My voice cracked, and I missed half the lyrics, but I kept singing anyway. This time, I didn't care if anyone was watching. There was no one to judge, no one to impress. Just me. Later that week, I joined a local hiking group I found posted on a bulletin board at the library. It was a small crew, 8 people, mostly women in their 40s and 50s, a few retired couples. The first time I showed up, I stood back, unsure if I belonged. But a woman named Marlene smiled at me, handed me a trail map, and said, "You've got good boots. That's all you need to be one of us." We hiked through hills and woods and winding paths I never knew existed right outside my neighborhood. We shared snacks, traded stories, and I laughed, genuinely laughed, when one of the women lost her balance trying to take a photo and landed in a pile of leaves. For the first time, I didn't feel like someone's wife or mother. I felt like a person again. A woman with her own legs, her own pace. When I came home that afternoon, cheeks sun-kissed and leg sore, I sat down at the kitchen table with a sketch pad I hadn't opened in years. The pages were yellowing, the cover cracked, but it welcomed me. I sketched slowly, lines first, then shape. My hands remembered more than I thought they would. I drew the cliffside from Portugal, the shadow of Camilla's curls, a glass of red wine beside a bowl of olives. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I lit candles in the evenings. Not for ambience or guests, just for me. I played music in the kitchen while I cooked, danced when no one was watching, and occasionally when the window was open, I'd notice the neighbor across the street smile at the sight of me twirling in my socks with a wooden spoon in hand. The house, once heavy with the ghosts of other people's needs, had become my own again. Slowly, quietly, room by room. There were still signs of the past, of course. I hadn't erased them, I didn't need to. The past didn't control me anymore. It simply sat in the corner like an old book I no longer had to read. Jordan hadn't responded to my voice message, but I wasn't waiting. I had said what I needed to say. If he chose to grow, to repair, to understand, I'd be here. Not as his cleanup crew, but as his mother on her own terms. And Derek? I imagined he was off somewhere explaining me away. Telling people I snapped or needed space. Let him. His version of the story didn't have to be mine anymore. One evening, after finishing a section of garden I'd weeded myself, I lit a fire in the backyard pit. I sat wrapped in a blanket, watching the flames crackle, the sky darken, the stars blink into view one by one. I sipped tea and stared at the little home I'd once nearly abandoned, now slowly becoming something new. Not a perfect ending, but a beginning. A beginning where I woke up each day and chose myself. Where I made space for solitude, for creativity, for laughter and silence. Where I was no longer the backdrop to someone else's life, but the center of my own. And it was enough. More than enough.